Authority with Alpine Study Center, and I'm here with my friend Eric Van Wyk, an artist up in La Crosse, Wisconsin, who does everything from homages to Dutch masters to giant puppets for stage and theater. And today we're going to touch on hopefully several things, but I think primarily we're going to look at some of his very playful recent work on a calendar. So Eric has a love of gardening, and that love of gardening and love of art, painting, photography come together in some really neat ways. And Eric also puts a lot of thought in terms of his faith into his work. And so Eric is married to Andrea, and they have 4 kids. Did I get that right now? 5 now. 5. Yes, I forgot Hendrik. Is that right? So you'll have to remind go. You did this last time we talked. Why don't you go through your children again? It's been a while since we've seen them all. So do that for us and tell us whatever else you'd like to say about you and your work.
Thank you, Dan. Yeah, it's a pleasure to meet with you and to be able to talk about art and faith and some of the things I've been working on. So yeah, I'm married to Andrea. She's a pediatrician here at Gunderson Health in La Crosse. And my son, Willem, is 11. And then we have Elsa, who is about to turn 9. And then Mina, who is 6. Louisa, who is now 4. And Hendrik, who is almost 1 year old. And so we are caretaking a farm just south of La Crosse on Brinkman Ridge. And it's been a really delightful journey into doing more gardening and seeing how my artistic life and my personal life growing more food, these sort of overlaps are starting to happen more and more. It's a place that we got connected to because I wanted to grow a bunch of melons. And so an opportunity came up to garden here, and then it became a friendship. And then they said, well, would you like to caretake the place for a few years? And so it was really providential how the Lord opened up a friendship into a beautiful place to live for a while and caretake. So, yeah.
It's fantastic. I remember the first melons. I think it was your first go around, and you shared some with us. I wish I remembered maybe you remember the type of melon that you gave us, told us to cut it in half, scoop out the seeds, and pour port into it, and then scoop it out with a spoon. That was delicious.
That would be a French melon known as the Petit Gris de Reni. And
it was on the tip of my tongue.
Yep. You're going to get there. It's a French cantaloupe, which, in the United States, we tend to mix muskmelon and cantaloupe. I mean, you live in Indiana, which is sort of the muskmelon capital of the United States, I would say. But cantaloupes are actually have a very smooth rind, and they tend to be even more pungent than a muskmelon, and especially these French ones. And what's great about a lot of heirloom seeds in particular is the history they bring to the plant growing, the amazing genetic history that they carry with them, which is, I think amazing how God created the creation to be that way, that it brings this history with it. And it brings with it successes that, as it's been developed by people. So the cultivation of that specific melon was started by a bishop in France, in Reni, France. And he had it in his garden. A brief history of melons is they originated in the Fertile Crescent and then migrated over to North Africa and then into Southern Europe. And then from there, when the New World opened up, they migrated over to North America. But they had been in Asia actually even before that. That's where some of the oldest melons come from. So it's probably a cross of a couple things, but it happened in this bishop's garden. And now there's a whole Petit Gris de Renies society in France where you can make sure you're getting the creme de la creme of this cantaloupe. I really enjoy it. It's my favorite cantaloupe to grow. It's very floral. You cut one open and the whole house starts to smell like this, wonderful melon. And it's very sweet, but it has a nice floral quality. So yeah, and then so I shared it with you. I've shared it with others. And what's great is they sort of demand to be eaten. There's no passive, well, I'll get to you later. This is a melon that says, you must into this right now.
That's great. I love it. I had no idea that history. That's fantastic. I love that. Even as you don't just decide, oh, I'm going to grow some melons so that I can paint them. You want to understand the whole process from beginning to end. And then you did end up painting still lifes of the melons as well.
Yes. Yeah. That kind of was a really beautiful bonus afterwards was, we were garden as a family. It was something I wanted to do with our kids. And
hi, Eric.
Hi, Amy.
You guys aren't recording, are you?
We are.
Oh, seriously? Sorry. I thought you were just like practicing things.
This amazing thing I was about to say, but besides,
sorry.
How are you?
Doing pretty good. I had my first non-night shift yesterday, so that was nice.
Oh my, not sure where we were there. But that's all right.
I think we were just I think we were just talking about heirloom melons and the history, like how I ended up starting to paint them.
Yeah. Yeah.
So my initial desire to garden more was, we had a small backyard garden, but it was just such a great way for us as a family to do something together, to literally get your hands in the dirt. I was about to turn 40 and I just had even a more desire to grow things. And I've heard that from a few other people, like as you get older, you just feel like you really need to get your hands in the dirt more. And that kind of led me to doing a larger melon patch. And it's such a great way to build community, because a melon also kind of demands a party oftentimes, especially a watermelon. It's, it's hard to eat one by yourself. A family could do it, but there's also something beautiful about setting one out and cutting it out together and just sharing, and it's fresh. And so we just had a great season of that. And then I just started taking these melons, and putting them in photographs and arranging them and setting them up for still lives. And I just found that the colors, but also kind of the textures kind of complemented each other so well. And there's not a lot of still lives with melons. The Dutch did do a lot of them, but there's not a big contemporary melon painting scene. So, which, yeah, it was like, well, there's something unique here about this, and
yeah.
The other thing that's quite compelling about the still life is that it's trying to capture a moment, but also suggests that life is going to move on past this painting. So, for example, in a lot of the Dutch masters and other European masters, when they would do a still life, there was these things that gave nod to time, whether it is a piece of fruit that was actually starting to rot, just barely, or leaking fruit. And then you see a bug coming in and drinking it. And there are little details, but then as you look at them, you start to realize the artist suggesting that time is passing within this painting. And tomorrow, these things will be another step of, decay or, being eaten. And so even though they're really beautiful and like, oh, I could eat that right now, which is true, but yet you also start to see that there is a passage of time, and that then it's about our humanity, knowing that we are temporal, that we won't live forever, that the gift of today is beautiful, but yet we also, need to number our days, that we know that there is a finite amount of time we have, and only the Lord knows sort of when that passage is. And so it's kind of this, for me, it became, as I studied these Dutch masters of the still life, it became this way to see the profoundness of life, but also the celebration of life, that it's kind of something being offered up to us. That these ordinary elements become kind of extra beautiful and also very meaningful, you know.
Yeah. Well, why don't we look at some of those? You pull up a couple of your favorite of the melon
Yeah,
paintings, and
sure.
I have noticed in I this is really helpful for me because I've noticed in some still lifes where there is a leaking, something leaking from it, or the bugs on it. And I always thought, oh, that I thought it was supposed to be like just pretty, and instead it looks there's just a little bit of something unsettling sometimes. But that makes a ton of sense to me that it's the showing time and the temporality of all created things.
Yeah, yeah, that there's the gift of life that's happening, but it's also knowing that there is parameters within that, you know.
Mhm.
So in this painting, this is one I just finished. It's two different types of melons, and but there are I I'll say there's three different insects that are at play within this painting, and so this is one of my own compositions. And but you can tell that I'm kind of borrowing from the style of the Dutch masters in terms of the dark background, the strong sense of light. The melons are literally pooling out juice in front of us. We have a sense of the foliage that grew this plant, which is also a really unique thing, that it's not just the fruit on its own, but that there is the vine that supported it, and gave it life. And even there's some flowers like suggesting, this vine could have grown even more melon besides I pulled it out of the ground. But so there's this nod to the future, and then we have this present of this melon that's cut up, ready to be enjoyed and eaten. So there's this offering up of that, as a viewer. You have the melon that's not even cut open yet, so that could be for a couple days from now. And so I started to really enjoy that and find that these layers built it up to being more than just, oh, that looks like a sumptuous thing, or a palette to just enjoy. But it's actually, hopefully, as a viewer, you think about life. You start to think about, that the gift of it, but also, what do things mean, and how do we live in this present moment that we have? So yeah,
Fantastic. So I see butterfly, a bee, and ants. Is that right?
yep, you got them all. So yep, yeah.
Why did you choose? And the bee seems like pollination and some again of that life. The ant is on the other side of that, maybe taking your I don't know what. Yeah, what? And then the butterfly is just a beautiful complement. And I love how some of the color, even in the monarch, if that is a monarch, looks kind of like the orange of a monarch, but the orange complements or draws from the color of the melon. It's beautiful. I love the leaves outside the window as well. But yeah, what can you speak more to those three particular insects?
Yeah, for me, it was the size. I wanted to suggest the small, the medium, and the somewhat large, even though it's still not very large. These are also all things you would see, at least in a Wisconsin garden. A common yellow honey bumblebee, ants, and then it's a painted lady butterfly. Um,
Okay.
but part of that was because they're very common, and yet they also have the coloring felt like it was a good extension of the melon, and same with the bumblebee, that they start to create a relationship of design too. So yeah.
hmm It's great. The texture is anything that you can say about the texture, both of the melons themselves. They're very distinct textures. One looks like it's more bumpy, and one is more of a pattern of squiggly lines. But then also paint wise, is there, since we can't, we're not up close to see the physicality of the brush strokes, was there anything specific regarding the texture that you did with the paint?
Yeah, I was trying to, push the contrast with the smooth and the rough textures, and then find those places to amplify that. So you have the really smooth inside of the melon, but I tried to juxtapose that with both the somewhat rougher melon in the background and then the more kind of squiggly texture of this melon up front. So you start to realize like there is variety within the creation too. Um, you'll when we talk about the vegetable series, you'll see within our supermarket produce we tend to have starting to see more of a monolithic type of produce that we have. It's regimented, and so you will often not see multiple types of textures unless it's a special event. In terms of melon festival or in terms of apple days, and you'll start to see those textures. But we don't tend to like rough things, right? And if you even things like a humble sweet potato or turnip, we eat them, but yet they're not. I don't know if we'd call it always beautiful because they have that scaliness to it. And for me, that was also part of this. Is melons have this roughness on the outside, but this really delicate richness that's very smooth on the inside. So with the painting itself, I tried to push that and use, I paint in acrylic primarily. So acrylic is great because you kind of have to build it up, as opposed to oils where you can, keep working and blend. But acrylics are really good at building up in terms of creating that depth of field. The outside, I try to keep very smooth and somewhat abstract, so to suggest the presence of it, but it has somewhat distance, so that you, again, creating the visual, things in front of you, but marching away from you as a viewer. So, yeah.
That's great. I love it. I love that idea of the delicate within the rough exterior. And we want everything uniform typically.
Yeah. Yep.
Well, why don't we look at some of those, the calendar ones? And I'm torn here because I really want to. You're talking about Dutch paintings, and you have the windmill behind you, and I really want to talk about that series sometime. I've seen that up close, and it's beautiful and amazing. That the size of those paintings, which we're not going to be able to even grasp in a talk here. But do you have, just as a quick question, do you have those paintings, the windmill paintings, on JPEGs or PDFs or digitally?
Yes. Yeah. I have them either individually or as packets. So I can send that to you and be able to show that or send it to you. Yep. Okay. Here's the introduction.
This is great.
Lisa,
so, which daughter is this? Introduce.
Louisa.
I thought it was Louisa. Yeah. Hi there. I'm Dan. I bet you don't remember me at all.
He was at Trinity with us. You've probably seen him, but it's been a little bit yet.
Okay. Few years. So you were like really little when we saw you.
Are you having lunch?
And I'm 4.
I know. You're big now, aren't you?
You're getting very big. Yep. Are you having your lunch? Okay. Can you say bye and then can you go finish your lunch?
Bye-bye. Sounded like she just fell on her face when she.
No, just running away. She's a runner.
Okay.
She recently said she wants to be a puppy when she grows up. That's what her goal is.
Not a bad goal.
Yep. So she acts like she'll ask to be fed like a puppy, like a bowl on the floor. And she'll have a leash around her, and so
does Willem oblige? It seems like as an older brother, he might be kind of happy to lead her around on a leash.
He's pretty good about it. Actually, the other sisters are even better about it. They will join one will become a puppy with her, one will be the mother dog, and sort of share the puppiness and all that. So yeah.
Great. That's hilarious. Well, I think let's transition to the calendar actually, and I'd love to come back and give maybe a second full kind of episode or interaction on the windmill paintings,
Sure.
and make that its own thing. So yeah, so let's transition to the calendar and talk to us a little bit about how you even came about with the idea and of these calendar images. These are just a blast. I think this is so much fun.
Awesome. Should I go and pull up an image?
Yeah, that'd be great. Pull up an image and start telling us about how you got into this.
So last fall and last year, many artists were, having to retool a bit with COVID, working at home more. A lot of my theater work was delayed or put on hold. And so I found in the late fall, I was just playing in my studio, and we had just finished harvesting a lot of stuff from the garden. We had just a very prolific year last year, and I think it's amazing that the providence of the earth that the Lord gives us, that it didn't get the message that there was a pandemic happening. It was the fecundity of it and how prolific it was really remarkable. And I talked to other farmers and gardeners, and it's never across the board because weather doesn't work that way, but there was just a really amazing amount of produce that was grown. It was just really great conditions. So I just was humbled by that and kind of in awe of it, just the gift of it that it just kept giving, and was really remarkable. So we had these, all these peppers and carrots, and I was literally just cleaning them, but then I kept finding these like really interesting, playful vegetables. And so I'm a puppet artist as well, and so you're always looking for forms that can be visually transformed into something else. Usually figurative work, and these vegetables were just screaming to be played with. And so I literally just started, creating these little figures out of it, but also starting to think about the story of what was happening within the scene. So, for example, this one is the Great Radish ski jump, and there is a really great ski jump right like 20 miles from us in Westby, where they do the ski jump, and we've gone. It's really interesting. And so I had these winter radishes, and I had these carrots, and then some peppers. And there's a French artist who uses beans within his vegetables to kind of create, to really sort of say, I am referencing the human form. So I borrowed from that same conceit of using beans. But then I started to create some rules for myself that I wouldn't use anything from the store. Like it had to be everything that we grew or that I could find on the farm. That it wasn't I really need an orange for this. Well, I couldn't go get an orange. So sort of creating some parameters for myself. So all this is grown from us or found. And what really got interesting is realizing like scale. So you got carrots and radishes, creating trees. You create a moon from cutting a carrot on edge. But then it was like, well, what should I use for a slope of snow? And I was like, well, I got this giant squash, and if I put it like this, and so I basically had this little table that I would set up these scenes with, and I had some lights, and I painted some very simple backgrounds, just to kind of give focus to it, and then I would use magician string to hang things, and I would use wires. I mean, just the setup alone, it was just get it right, and you go take a picture, and then something would fall down. And so, but again, kind of tying back into the still life of paintings, I didn't have, a week to do this. It was like, well, if I cut this up, it's going to start looking more and more aged every day, or even an hour later, it could be, kind of soft. And sometimes that helped. There's one with the tomato later that was I actually let it rot more and more to get just the right amount of texture. So yeah, this is the Great Radish ski jump. And so then, I started to think of it a little bit as a calendar year, but also just like what was available. And this is, Pepper Love in Venice. And, so, I had this really beautiful big yellow pepper, which is called King Richard. And it's like, well, this has got to be a boat. It just says boat, right? And then, we had these other different types of peppers. So within here, there's actually 4 varieties of peppers. And so part of it too is a lot of these vegetables you actually probably wouldn't find in the store because they're a little bit out of the ordinary. They're goofy, or perhaps at a very specialty high-end store, or but in terms of your average grocery store, you wouldn't find these because they would be outside of that margin of what is expected or what is wanted. So it kind of was a fun way to use rejects. These people talked about the vegetable misfits. There's a company that sells the misfits to people, and so but I also feel like with this series, it was a exciting way to use stuff that didn't have a home in a way. And but those were the best things about it because they had so much character. You wouldn't have been able to do this with just a supermarket pepper in many ways. Yeah, in every scene, kind of the play would just kind of happen, or you'd start. I set it up and like, well, I feel like it needs another character, or it needs another commentary, or a vague suggestion of a scene of what's happening in place. And so I would just kind of let the scene dictate it, and just take a lot of photos, different angles, and slowly start to feel like how it worked visually. So yeah.
I love what look to be lanterns on either side of the bridge. And I love the pole, the gondola pilot's pole there is fantastic.
Yeah, it was just a remarkable way to be like, well, I need a really long, thin pepper. And so I'd go in my pepper box and, kind of scrounge around and be like, oh, this would be perfect for that. And, each of these has a story. That's what, we were talking about the melons. The lantern peppers are called Sugar Rush Peach. And there are now artisan gardeners out there who are, selectively cultivating hybrids together. So it's sort of the older school way of creating new crops is you take two plants you like, you plant them next to each other, and then you save the seed of those two cross-pollinating. Then you start to see what are the traits that you start to like, and so you repeat and repeat. Sometimes it takes years to kind of cultivate that. So there's this really great history of cultivation with vegetables and fruit that is just remarkable. I think it's a great picture of how God intended human culture making. That it is God has created the ingredients, the rawness of creation, the potential of creation, but yet we are stewards of that to sort of fall in love with it and also get to cultivate it and try, develop new varieties. And some of that's an accident, some of these are accidents. Some of it's, people being really intentional about using wisdom and using the knowledge to create new varieties too. And I just find it just a really remarkable picture of human cultivation. So yeah,
that's fantastic. We that's one of the core things that we talk about here at Alcuin is the cultural mandate, Genesis 1:28, that the first commission that God gave man and woman were to spread the garden geographically, numerically, and to be sub creators, as Tolkien says, that here's the creation that God gave us, and now he says, "No, you guys try and take what I've given you to work with and work with it." I think that's a beautiful picture with the vegetables. It's funny, that's a very literally cultivation, and that's just very literal of. And yet when I'm so far removed from the land and from gardening, it's not. I've tried a little bit and failed miserably many times. My wife is like, just stay out of the garden. And so when I think of culture and cultivating, I get way down the road. I'm thinking of like taking the ores out of the ground, turning them into metals, turning them into circuitry, and then I get my Mac computer, right? There are a few steps in between there I think I skipped. But which all that is true. That is all cultivation of the creation we've been given. But you're much closer in to the kind of ancient original cultivation that where it all kind of begins by doing this kind of thing. It's fascinating. That's great. I love it. I also really like the comment on the misfits that being there is a beauty in what would be considered by kind of our mass production model of culture to be they'd be considered throwaways. They're the and yet you're seeing, yeah, they're the only things that actually will work for these wonderful pieces of art are the things that we would, are the rejects. And I love that. There's something really profound, I think, in that.
Yeah, we've if you read into like heirloom gardening, which is there's more attention to it, but like within just the United States alone, we've lost upwards of 80 to 90% of our genetic diversity in vegetables. Depending on what type, like specifically like lettuces and peppers, we just don't have those. Mm-hmm. And so it's I think of it as the creation. If you go to the table of the Lord and all these plants that have been developed, and there's only a corner of it that is offered up or potential, then you're missing out on what not only God intended, but also just the beauty of that, And so I think for me, the cultivation is as all people, as all image bearers, we benefit from cultivation of whether that's the Macintosh computer or from plants that have been cultivated together. I also think the process of cultivation, in terms of like a garden, is in the process of doing art is just as important as the end result of having something that's delicious. So even our failures, our garden failures. I was sharing this story the other day. I was so proud. In Minneapolis, I had a friend who got me into garden, Rob, and we went to a plant sale, and I got a bunch of basil, and I planted it in my little patch, and I was just, oh, this basil, I can smell it. And it was, only like 9 inches tall, but I was like imagining the pesto and, all the things you can do, right? Because that's, you're sort of get the vision of what cultivation can be. Mm-hmm. Well, these slugs showed up and just started, decimating my basil. And in a very proletarian kind of way, I just went and got a big thing of salt and I just shook it all over those basil plants because I said, I'm going to get those slugs. I'm going to eradicate them, So that was a good example of using a hammer to treat a small problem, because the next day the basil was totally killed, totally brown. I mean, the salt absolutely killed it. So yeah, I killed the slugs, but I also killed basil completely. So there's a lot of stories like that with, with gardening. You joked about that too with your own process in the garden, and so I think it gives us humility, because then we're like, well, you have to kind of take be patient, but also like have that trial and error. You've got to have those failures, and that's part of that process. And it's also, I think, I certainly believe that everyone could garden, everyone can paint, everyone should, I think. And yet we have people that are really skilled at it. And that's where I think the sub creator, we start to see that God has blessed the idea of technique and skill, that a cultivation of that is part of that as well, and that Calvin Serveld, when he talked about like what does it mean to be an artist, one of the things he says is, well, you're a professional imaginator, right? So it's you have a distinction of being a professional, not necessarily because you have mastered a skill, because that alone is not just that's only the tool, but there's also an aspect of being imaginative, and then the training of that, that notion of instant genius is a fallacy, and that there is a training, there's the perspiration, there's the failures, and that, but there's also the process that you can enjoy that God gives us, and can also be frustrating, and that's where grace makes its way in there and fills in those gaps of failure in really kind of remarkable ways.
That's fantastic. Calvin Serville, you said?
Serveld. Yeah, he has many wonderful books. He's a very astute, reformed art philosopher. He wrote Bearing Fresh Olives Leaves, and also Rainbows for a Fallen World. Those are his two sort of seminal texts. But he was really trying to write out what are the norms for artists specifically that are being faithful to the Lord. And also norms for people, like how do we live aesthetic lives, that it's not just certain people who live richly in terms of what their life looks like, but that we are all called to, again, cultivate that, to, we make choices of how we live, how we dress, the art we look at, the music we listen to. Those are all aesthetic choices that we make. But what are the things, what's guiding that, and what are either the frame, or in his, what is the umbrella that kind of is overarching all of that, so that we look at it hopefully correctly and also strive to cultivate in a correct sort of way, so, yeah.
That's fantastic. We're going to take a pause here. I've got a delivery. That was great timing.
Great.
So take a break. I'm going
to. Cool.
All right. Yeah. Let's continue on here and look at a few more of your. I'd be happy to go through as many as you want to of the calendar pieces. Okay. These are a blast. And then I'd also like to know at some point if there's a way that if somebody wanted to order this calendar, is that a possibility?
Yeah, so that is my hope to do, is to, I think it's going to be partly the timing of it. And when I finally got it edited, it was like, well, it'd be ready for like February of this year. So I decided to wait and try to have it be ready in the fall so that it'll be for 2022. So,
okay.
So, I have to do some more research into that, but yeah, it'll be something that probably online, either I'll set up an Etsy shop or maybe direct some, like a Foursquare account on a website that people can order. Cause I do think, I'd like to have it be more available to see what happens,
Mm-hmm.
So yeah. Yep.
Yeah. Well, let me know and I'll put the link on our site for you too.
That's awesome, man. Thanks.
Yeah. My pleasure. All right, so let's what's the next next
Yeah.
entry in the calendar?
How many would it be good just to go through all of them, or would you think just pick out maybe another half dozen or so, or?
Yeah, maybe just pick out some of your favorites, and that way there will still be some surprise for people who are going to buy the calendar. They can they're gonna you don't want to get everything.
No, exactly. Yep. Okay, great.
Oh, that is beautiful.
So some of them are within the calendar are more story based. This one is I there's these wonderful flowers called Amish coxcomb, and then there's different colors of that we had, and they're just beautiful. And as they were there in the garden, I looked at them and thought, well, this just looks like coral underwater. And so then once you have kind of one germ of idea, I started to look out for other things that flowed into that. So there's a I don't know the name, but there's a bunny tail flower. That's what my kids call them. There's the yellow and orange are calendulas, which is an edible flower. And I started to look around and be like, well, what can I use to suggest, sea life? And I tried to use primarily flowers. So that was the other kind of rule I started to develop is, if there's a scene that has carrots, great. But this is a scene with flowers. So what are the flowers I can find? And so that was really fun because it kind of was another broad forms that were out there in the garden. I did break my rule. I chose one gourd that you can probably see within the picture.
Is it the gray lumpy one?
Yep. So that's an Italian gourd. Italian squash called Marina de Chioggia, and it's just super warty. I mean, it's like one of the wartiest squashes out there. And I just started to play. I would take a picture, I'd look at it and think, well, maybe it needs just a little detail here, and just letting the scene sort of flow and be something beautiful, but also be kind of in the balance between real and that you could imagine a scene like this, and yet also be that there's a playfulness that I'm recognizing what those things are, that these are flowers as fish, that they are flowers as as a sea anemone or a sea urchin, things like that. And this scene in particular was just, it was really late in the season. Like this is the last dahlia flower that was in the garden. It was one of the last little mini roses on the rose bush. So it just felt like there was these windows of time, and there was a sense of like, I've got to do this now because in a week it'll be snowing, that sort of thing, so yeah.
So I have a couple questions on this one. Well, I guess one, just an observation, but the yellow flower that seems to be just under the surface at the top, the sense of depth is just amazing. The little bit of highlighting, did you add that little bit of highlighting in the paint after you put the flower there? Or did you just kind of notice, that it'll work, right? Place the flower right here on this backdrop. And it looks like almost a reflection at the top of the surface of the water there. It seems to be hovering, and you've really captured this floating feeling with that.
Yeah, that what I would say is a wonderful series of I wouldn't say coincidence because I don't necessarily believe in that, but that it's a bit of providence there with visually how it was painted, because I painted that beforehand, just a loose wet blend. That little flower I suspended with the magician thread. And, one thing that's interesting is when you have a dimensional scene and you're taking it with, a digital camera, you have to think your lens placement is really important, because if you're too low, you're looking up at everything. But if you're too high, you're looking down at everything. So I was trying to capture that sense of being in it and looking up and down.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that sense of direction is really important. And so that just took a bit, to be honest, to find is, a little lower, move it over and that sort of thing. And so what you're talking about with the reflection is just a really wonderful um, gift that came out of this scene, to be honest. So, yeah.
Beautiful. And then the sponge-ish thing there, what is that? That the white flower is sitting on.
Yeah. So that is called yellow Celosia, which is a cousin of Amish coxcomb, which is the bright red flowers on the bottom were seeds saved and cultivated by this Amish family, and then there are also these variants of it. So there's yellow Celosia, there's green Celosia, there's multicolored ones. They are kind of you'll notice more in farmers markets that they're kind of a really hip flower right now in the last few years because they're very textured. They literally feel like shag carpet. I mean, they're just, my kids are like, oh, that feels so nice in the garden, because they're very tactile and they're very soft. And but if you kind of look, they really look like coral because it's like the little squiggly forms are just like brain coral you might see, in a reef or something like that. And so, yeah, so that's what that flower is the yellow Celosia. So, yeah, yep.
It's fantastic. I love it. And then are those the black and white, what look to be almost like black-eyed peas? Are those parts of the flower?
No, so that was my addition to it.
Okay.
And that kind of became out of like when I was working with like the figurative elements in order to maybe take it to the next sort of suggestive step. Is the beans kind of created really good eyes, and in the puppet world, once you have that eye on an object, like a physical eye, it really opens up, that bringing to life, sort of like the eye is the portal to the soul.
Mm-hmm.
And, so the eyes were important just to give like the detail, but also the suggestion of, real life.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, gluing beans onto flowers I didn't think I'd do that, but that is another technical fun challenge is getting that to stick, finding the right glue. So yeah, little things like that you kind of have to develop or find. So, yep.
It's fantastic. Beautiful. Give us one more.
Yeah.
Or maybe a couple.
Okay. So we've talked about carrots. This is one of the a really fun carrot one that, again, it was literally these carrots just were pulled out of the ground. And I thought, wow, what a beautiful carrot. But also, it's already doing this for me, right? Like I didn't have, these are grown this way. They, sometimes there's an old science of why carrots start to split or turn, and in some ways, some farmers perhaps might say it's a defect, right? That they don't really want this because when we buy carrots in the store, it's 12 or whatever even sized carrots in a bag, no dimension or no variance within that. And so, yeah, these would definitely be veggie misfits. This central figure of the carrot doing what I call the cannonball jump in was, really that was the key to this scene. Is we dug this carrot up, and I thought, oh, this is special, and so that became kind of the keyhole into creating this scene of these carrots having it, down at the lake in summertime, and then it was just fun to like, well, what are the other characters? Like, okay, here's one that's thinking about getting in the dock, and here's one that's already jumping in. And here's the easygoing friend just watching this happen in the water. And so it was kind of just a joy to think about the relationships and thinking about, summertime, July, day at the lake kind of thing. But again, sticking with, Well, I just need an accent. So then you slice a piece of carrot and you create a sun with a carrot, because that's, the repetition of that motif that's, within that. So, yeah.
I love the dipping toe. Yeah, the thinking, the very tentative. Do I want to get in? And then what is the splash made out of?
Yeah, so that was a little, there's some trickiness there because, I didn't have a vegetable that was a splash. I mean, now in hindsight, I was like, maybe I could have used a cabbage leaf, but I didn't think of it at the time. So, that's where I took a piece of paper and I, frilled it up and kind of tucked it underneath the cut carrot. But I also then the other, to be honest, the other thing is I edited all these in Photoshop.
Okay.
Just to clean them up. And to kind of give them a uniformity. And then I would add some texture to it. What I didn't want to have done is where it looks like a highly processed image. I think we've seen that. This style was not that. It wasn't to be. I wanted to acknowledge that there is kind of a physicality to these images. So, yep.
That's great. That's great. I wondered if it was it looked like an eggshell to me for a minute.
Yeah, that also would have been a very good choice. And we have eggshells here, so we could have done that. Yeah.
No, this is great. This is real. This is, I think, the first one that you showed me when you were working on these, or last time we talked. And I love the playfulness of it.
Yeah, awesome. Yep.
This is great. Do you want to show one more?
Yeah, let's do one more.
Okay.
Sure. And this is we'll just finish off the year with another winter scene. How about? So this carrot or tomatoes and tomato snowmen in having a snowball fight, and this was fun, but it was also trickier because I had floating tomatoes but it started with just having some cherry tomatoes and that were sitting on the counter, and there was 3 of them. I'm like, well, that looks just like a snowman, and I just started to run with it from there, and trying to use materials that I had. So, winter radish as arms, and pepper tops for hats, and a winter radish for the tree. But then again, they're playing on another type of white squash that was just like, oh, that'd be a perfect winter snow scene. And I'm sort of telling you, what these are, but I also, hopefully what's fun as a viewer seeing it on its own is that you have that discovery that you kind of do, and you try to, what is that? And I think I know what that is. And so that's one of the joys of it for me, for the viewer, is that they'll get to sort of see it, but then over time be like, oh, I think I now know what that is, so yeah.
This one's a blast. I love how you have the tomatoes. It took me a minute as I was trying to figure out, okay, but the buttons, I realized, oh, those aren't added on. Those are actually the stem of the tomato. That's the top of the tomato. You just turned it. That's brilliant. Yep. And then the head is turned upwards, so you don't have that. Just great idea.
Yeah. This scene is one that got in the process of, by the end of it, the tomatoes were barely staying together, because you're pinning them together, and it's tomatoes. They're not necessarily always that hard, and so they just barely made it through the photo shoot, and then they just were like, should have done a post picture of that, so
yeah. Poor models. You killed the models in the process of the photo shoot.
Yeah, all for the sake of art,
Yeah. Oh, this is great. Well, I think what I would love to do, Eric, is hopefully do this again sometime very soon, and talk some about do another series here on your Dutch Masters. Every time I say that, I think of the cigars. I'm sorry, those cheap cigars that I used to get when I first discovered cigars in college. But that is what your the windmill paintings are an homage to Dutch master painters. Is that right?
That's correct. So a few years ago, I did a show that took about 2.5 years to assemble, which is about 7 very large scale paintings of me giving homage to Dutch masters, which is taking these Dutch master painters, making them larger, painting them myself with acrylics, and with some of my own brush strokes. So not being exact copies, but more their homages to it. And specifically with the still lifes, but also with the landscapes, it opened up for me personally just another step as a painter of how to progress, and really influenced me visually, but also like in subject matter. There's a lot of theology and the amount of sky they had to the amount of land, the objects within the painting. There's a lot of meaning there, and so I found that to be just a really great way to discover a new type of painting. Even though these are 200-300 years old, I think it was a great way for history to inform my work and my newer work, and a way to go forward. So yeah.
Great. Well, I would love to talk about that, and especially the idea. So next time maybe we can talk about those and the idea of mimesis. As I hear you talking, the idea of imitation and learning by conforming yourself to a set of boundaries that were given. Yeah. And there's a lot of theological value, I think, in that idea of mimesis. I think I'm saying that correctly. Of imitation.
Yes, yeah, I would completely agree, and that would be a great thing to expand upon for sure.
And then I'd also love to go back to when I first met you, the very first time I heard you talk about your art. It was about puppets, and actually had the honor of seeing a show in Minneapolis at the Children's Museum there next to the Minnesota Institute of Art, and a lot of the work that you did with that show, with the giant tree and a dragonfly and a river scene, and all kinds of really cool physicality in the show. So would love to explore that aspect of your work as well at some point. But we'll save those for maybe a couple more episodes here. And right now, just say thank you so much, Eric, for sharing your time, your talents, and I look forward to talking again.
You're welcome, Dan. It was a pleasure. I'm glad to share it with everyone. So thanks.
Yeah, you bet. All right. Bye-bye.